What you're about to hear was never supposed to leave that courtroom. The people inside that room, the lawyers, the jury, the judge, they all assumed this was just another hearing. Routine, controlled, predictable. But the moment Hoda Kotb stood up from her seat, everything changed. And what she said next didn't just shock the room. It shook the entire foundation of a case that millions of people had been following for months. Nobody saw this coming. Not the attorneys. Not the family. And definitely not the man sitting across that courtroom, Nancy's son-in-law, who had, until that very moment, appeared completely untouchable. To understand why that moment hit so hard, you have to go back further. Because this story didn't begin inside a courtroom. It began in the shadows, in quiet conversations behind closed doors, in moments that the public was never supposed to see. Nancy's family had always projected a perfect image. Polished appearances. Carefully managed interviews. A reputation built over decades that felt impossible to shake. To the outside world, they were powerful, united, and above reproach. But behind that image, something had been quietly unraveling. Sources close to the family revealed that tension had been building for months. Small disagreements at first, the kind that get brushed off, explained away, or simply ignored. But gradually, those small disagreements grew into something harder to contain. Communication broke down. Trust began to erode. And at the center of it all was one person who had been hiding in plain sight the entire time. Nancy's son-in-law. He was always present. Always composed. Always standing just close enough to the family to appear supportive, but never close enough to attract suspicion. He attended public events. He gave measured statements when needed. He smiled at the right moments and stayed silent at the right ones. He was, by every visible measure, exactly what a trusted family member should look like. But according to insiders, the reality behind that composure was something far darker. Weeks before the courtroom hearing, small details began surfacing that didn't quite fit the official narrative. Social media posts that seemed harmless at first glance but carried a different weight when you looked closer. One post in particular, a simple line that read, "Not everyone standing beside you wants you to win," was deleted within hours of going up. At the time, nobody paid attention. Now, people are calling it a warning. Around the same time, multiple sources reported unusual behavior from within the family's inner circle. Cancelled appearances. Avoided interviews. Private meetings that weren't announced or explained. According to one former associate, there were arguments, not loud, not dramatic, but intense in the way that only deeply personal confrontations can be. The kind where things are said that cannot be unsaid. And through all of it, the son-in-law remained calm. Composed. Present. That composure, it turns out, may have been the most telling detail of all. The courtroom hearing had been moving exactly as expected. Documents were reviewed. Lawyers spoke in measured tones. The judge maintained order. It was the kind of session that generates no headlines. Routine, controlled, forgettable. And then Hoda Kotb stood up. There was no dramatic build-up. No signal that anything unusual was about to happen. She simply rose from her seat, and something in the room shifted immediately. The energy changed. People turned. Papers stopped rustling. "I need to say something," she said. Her voice was steady. Her hands were not. The judge paused. For a brief moment, it looked like he might shut it down before she could continue. But he didn't. And that hesitation gave her everything she needed. "I've stayed quiet long enough," she continued. "What I witnessed does not match the story that this courtroom has been told." One attorney leaned forward instantly, whispering urgently to his client. Another began flipping through documents, searching frantically for something, anything, to get ahead of what was coming. But it was already too late. Because then she said his name. The son-in-law. The reaction was immediate and unmistakable. One family member visibly froze. Another looked away, avoiding eye contact entirely. And the son-in-law himself? He didn't move at all. Not a flinch. Not a blink. Just absolute stillness in a moment that demanded a reaction. And that stillness, somehow, was the most damning response of all. "You were there that night," Hoda said, her voice sharper now, more certain. Not where you told people you were, but exactly where everything started. The courtroom erupted, not loudly, but in that particular kind of controlled chaos where everyone is reacting at once but no one wants to be the loudest voice in the room. Objections were raised. The judge issued warnings. But the damage had already been done. Because Hoda wasn't finished. There are things that happened that you didn't expect anyone to see, she continued, her eyes briefly scanning the jury before locking back onto him. Decisions were made. Conversations were had. Movements that cannot be explained by the version of events this court has been given. Legal experts who later reviewed the transcript described the atmosphere at that moment as sitting on the edge of collapse, like the entire structure of the case was cracking open in real time. And then came the words that stopped everything. There is a recording. The room didn't just go quiet. It froze. Because recordings don't just change narratives. They end them. Hoda was careful with her words. It isn't complete, she admitted. But what it captures is enough to prove that what happened that night was not random. And it was not what anyone in this room has been led to believe. Immediately, an attorney stood and demanded clarification. Another tried to interrupt before she could continue. But she kept going, right up until the judge called for an immediate recess. No explanation. No follow-up. Just a sudden, abrupt end to a moment that had already gone far further than anyone in that room had planned. But here is the detail that changes everything about what happened next. The recording Hoda mentioned was never officially submitted as evidence. Not that day. Which means whatever is captured on that audio has not been fully revealed to the public. Not yet. And according to sources who were present inside that courtroom, what's on that recording doesn't just contradict one part of the official story. It contradicts the foundation of it. Within minutes of the recess being called, the story was already leaking out of the building. People were on their phones before they had even stepped outside. And once it hit the internet, it spread at a speed that nobody could control. Social media exploded. Hashtags trended worldwide. Video clips from inside the courtroom, shaky, unclear, but undeniably real, began circulating across every platform. And the more people watched, the more questions emerged. Why was the recess called so suddenly? Why was the recording not submitted as formal evidence? Who knew about it before Hoda spoke? And why did someone reportedly try to stop her before she could finish? Legal analysts began weighing in within hours, questioning whether evidence had been deliberately suppressed or strategically delayed. Others pointed to the reaction of the son-in-law, that unsettling, absolute calm, as a sign of someone who had prepared for this moment. Someone who knew something was coming and had already decided how to respond. But perhaps the most disturbing detail to emerge from the aftermath was this. According to a source who was seated near the front of the courtroom, one of the attorneys leaned toward a colleague during the chaos and said something that wasn't picked up by microphones, but was clear enough to be read. "Stop this right now." Not a suggestion. A warning. The recording exists. That much is no longer in question. What remains unknown is the full extent of what it contains, and when or whether it will ever be heard by the people who need to hear it most. What Hoda Kotb revealed inside that courtroom wasn't just a dark secret about Nancy's family. It was a crack in a story that had been carefully constructed and even more carefully protected. And now that the crack is visible, there is no closing it. The son-in-law remains at the center of a case that just became something far more complicated than anyone anticipated. The family, once considered untouchable, is now facing questions that demand real answers. And somewhere, on a recording that has not yet been fully revealed, the truth is waiting. The only question left is who gets to decide when and how it comes out. Because if what Hoda said inside that courtroom is even partially true, then everything that comes next is going to be far bigger than what we witnessed today. And this story? It is nowhere near over.